In the heart of Morocco's Atlas Mountains, where ancient cedar forests meet barren peaks, a legend was born that would shake the very foundations of the wild. His name was Atlas, and he was no ordinary lion. Standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder with a mane as dark as midnight stretching down his spine, this colossal predator carried the bloodline of the legendary Barbary lions. At 600 pounds of pure muscle and fury, Atlas was a living monument to power. But his true test would come when he faced an enemy that had crushed countless predators before him. 200 Cape buffalo, each one a walking fortress of bone and rage, stood between him and survival. The year was 2019, and the remote wilderness of the High Atlas had become a stage for one of nature's most impossible battles. Rangers who witnessed what unfolded that autumn day still speak in hushed tones about the lion who refused to yield, the giant who turned desperation into legend. This is not just a story of survival. This is the chronicle of Atlas, the unbroken giant whose roar echoed through mountains and whose courage rewrote the laws of the wild. If you've ever wondered what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, stay with us, because what you're about to witness will challenge everything you thought you knew about the limits of courage. And before we dive into this epic tale, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support helps these incredible stories reach wildlife lovers around the world. The Atlas Mountains stretch across Morocco like the spine of a sleeping giant, their peaks crowned with snow even as the valleys below burn under the African sun. For thousands of years, these rugged highlands sheltered the last remnants of the Barbary lions, those magnificent predators whose manes flowed like liquid darkness, and that of their whose strength exceed southern cousins. By the time Atlas drew his first breath in a hidden cave above the Eureka Valley, his kind had become ghosts, whispered about in Berber folklore, but rarely seen in flesh. Atlas was different from birth. Where other cubs stumbled and played, he moved with purpose. His mother, a scarred veteran of mountain warfare, recognized something ancient in his amber eyes. The bloodline of kings flowed through his veins, carrying memories of ancestors who had stalked these peaks when Rome was young. As he grew, his frame expanded beyond normal proportions. His shoulders broadened into platforms of muscle. His paws grew to the size of dinner plates, and his mane began its descent down his back in the distinctive pattern of the mountain lords. The High Atlas was no gentle nursery. Every meal was earned through blood and cunning. Barbary sheep bounded across cliff faces where a single misstep meant death. Wild boar charged from thorn thickets with tusks that could gut a careless predator. But most dangerous of all were the buffalo. These were not the familiar Cape buffalo of the eastern savannas, but their mountain cousins, hardened by altitude and cold, their horns spread wide as the battle axes, their tempers shortened by generations of conflict. Atlas learned early that buffalo were different from other prey. Where zebra fled and antelope scattered, buffalo stood their ground. They formed walls of horn and muscle that had broken many a pride's charge. His mother bore scars from buffalo encounters, white lines across her ribs that told stories of desperate hunts when starvation drove lions to attempt the impossible. She taught him to read the signs, to understand the way buffalo moved in formation, to recognize the moment when retreat meant survival and advance meant death. By his third year, Atlas had grown into something that defied classification. At 600 pounds, he dwarfed even the largest African lions. His mane had darkened to the color of storm clouds, flowing down his flanks like a cape of shadow. Rangers who caught glimpses of him through telephoto lenses whispered of a lion who seemed carved from the mountain itself, whose presence made the very air grow heavy with anticipation. But size alone does not make a legend. That required a test that would push him beyond the boundaries of possibility. The drought came without warning in the summer of 2019. Rivers that had flowed for millennia turned to dust. Springs that had never failed went silent. Across the high Atlas, animals began their desperate migration toward the few remaining water sources, creating a convergence unlike anything seen in living memory. Atlas, now a solitary king, ruling a territory spanning 30 square miles, felt the pressure as prey animals vanished into the heat shimmer. For weeks, he sustained himself on scraps. A Barbary sheep here, a wild boar there, meals that barely sustained his massive frame. His ribs began to show beneath his magnificent coat. His amber eyes, once bright with confidence, now carried the hollow look of approaching starvation. The mountain that had been his kingdom was, and with becoming his prison each passing day, the walls grew tighter. It was then that the buffalo arrived. They came down from the higher peaks like a dark tide, 200 strong, their hooves drumming against the rocky ground in a rhythm that shook the earth. These were the patriarchs and matriarchs of a dozen herds, forced together by desperation, their usual rendered territories lifeless by the relentless sun. At their head walked monsters, bulls whose horns spanned 6 feet from tip to tip, whose scarred hides told stories of battles with leopards, bears, and lions who had dared to test their resolve. Atlas watched from his perch on a granite outcrop as the herd settled around the last major spring in his territory. Steam rose from their nostrils in the cool mountain air. Dust clouds marked their movements as they jostled for position at the water's edge. 200 pairs of eyes scanned the surrounding cliffs, alert for any threat. 200 sets of horns glinted in the fading light like a forest of spears. The message was clear. This water belonged to them now. For 3 days, Atlas circled the herd like satellite orbiting a hostile planet. He studied their patterns, their hierarchies, their weaknesses. The young stayed the center, protected by a living fortress of adults. The old bulls formed the outer perimeter, their massive heads swinging constantly, searching for threats. The cows nursed their calves, but never relaxed their vigilance. This was not just a herd. It was an army that had perfected the art of collective defense over millions of years of evolution. On the 4th night, as the moon rose full above the peaks, Atlas made his decision. Starvation was no longer a distant threat, but an immediate reality. His strength was fading with each passing hour. Soon, he would be too weak to hunt at all, condemned to watch as his territory was simple claimed by others. The choice: die slowly of hunger or die fighting for the chance to live. The wind carried his scent down from the heights as he began his descent. Buffalo lifted their heads, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning the darkness. They knew he was coming. They had always known this moment would arrive. Somewhere in their ancient memory lived the knowledge that lions and buffalo were eternal enemies, locked in a dance of death that had played out across Africa for countless generations. Atlas paused at the edge of the firelight cast by the moon on the white rocks. Before him lay 200 of nature's most formidable warriors, each one capable of killing him with a single charge. Behind him stretched the empty mountains, where death by starvation waited with patient certainty. The choice was no choice at all. He lifted his massive head to the star-filled sky and roared. The sound rolled across the peaks like thunder, announcing his presence to every creature within miles. It was not just a hunting call, it was a declaration of war. The buffalo heard his challenge and answered with a chorus of snorts and bellows that shook the mountain walls. Hooves pounded against stone as the herd shifted into defensive formation, a living fortress of horn and muscle that had evolved over millennia to crush exactly this kind of threat. The youngest calves were pushed toward the center, while the massive bulls formed an outer ring of death, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like stars fallen to earth. Atlas descended through the shadows with the patience of a glacier. Each step was calculated, each movement flowing like liquid darkness across the rocky terrain. This was not the desperate charge of a starving predator, but the methodical approach of a strategist who understood that victory would come not through brute force alone, but through cunning refined by generations of mountain warfare. His ancestors had faced impossible odds before, and their blood sang in his veins with the memory of battles won against overwhelming numbers. The first bull to challenge him was a scarred veteran whose horns bore the marks of countless conflicts. Steam rose from his nostrils as he pawed the ground, sending showers of gravel cascading down the slope. Behind him, the herd pressed closer, a wall of solidarity that had broken the courage of every predator foolish enough to test their resolve. But Atlas was no ordinary predator, and this was no ordinary night. The came charge with the force of an avalanche. 1,200 pounds of rage and horn thundered up the rocky slope, hooves striking sparks from the stone. Atlas waited until the last possible moment before flowing aside like smoke, his massive frame moving with impossible grace. The bull's momentum carried him past his target, and in that instant of vulnerability, Atlas struck. His claws raked across the buffalo's flank, drawing blood that looked black in the moonlight. The herd erupted in fury. Bulls charged from 3 directions while cows bellowed warnings that echoed off the mountain walls. Atlas found himself at the center of a storm of hooves and horns, each impact promising death if it found its mark. But the mountain lion had learned lessons that no savanna predator could ever know. He used the terrain like a weapon, leaping from boulder to boulder, drawing his enemies into narrow passages where their numbers became a disadvantage. The battle raged through the night, with neither side yielding ground. Buffalo fell with throats torn open, their lifeblood staining the ancient stones. Atlas bore wounds that would have killed lesser predators, gashes across his ribs where horns had found their mark, punctures in his shoulders that leaked crimson streams down his midnight mane. Yet still, he fought with the fury of his ancestors, each roar a testament to the warrior kings who had ruled these peaks before the world forgot their names. As dawn broke over the high Atlas, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose, the battlefield lay strewn with the fallen. 17 buffalo had paid the ultimate price for their defiance. Their bodies scattered across the rocky amphitheater like monuments to the cost of war. The survivors, bloodied and exhausted, retreated toward higher ground, their formation broken, but their spirits undefeated. They had learned what Atlas already knew. Some battles have no winners, only survivors. Atlas stood alone among the carnage, his massive frame silhouetted against the rising sun. Blood matted his mane and painted his flanks in abstract patterns of violence. His amber eyes, dimmed by exhaustion and pain, surveyed the scene with the detached gaze of a general counting the cost of victory. He had faced 200 enemies and lived to tell the tale, but the mountain would remember this night long after his bones had returned to dust. The feast that followed lasted for days. Atlas gorged himself on buffalo meat, restoring the strength that had carried him through the longest night of his life. His wounds began to heal, leaving new scars to join the collection that mapped his journey from cub to legend. Rangers who found the battlefield weeks later could barely comprehend what they were seeing. The evidence of the battle was written in blood and bone across an area the size of a football field. Word of the confrontation spread through the scientific community like wildfire. Experts who had dedicated their lives to studying predator behavior struggled to explain what Atlas had accomplished. Lions were pack hunters, they insisted. No single cat could survive a confrontation with even a small group of buffalo, let alone face down an entire herd. Yet the evidence could not be denied. 17 carcasses lay scattered across the mountainside, each bearing the distinctive marks of lion claws and teeth. But Atlas cared nothing for the doubts of distant scholars. He had proven something far more important to himself. The blood of the Barbary kings still flowed true, undiluted by the centuries that had seen his kind fade into legend. He was the heir to a throne that predated human civilization, the keeper of secrets whispered in the mountain winds since time immemorial. The buffalo had tested his worthiness, and he had passed their brutal examination. The seasons turned as they always had, bringing snow to the high peaks and green grass to the valleys below. The drought that had forced the confrontation became memory, replaced by the eternal cycle of abundance and scarcity that governed life in the mountains. New herds arrived to test the borders of Atlas's domain, but none approached with the same confidence that had marked their predecessors. The story of the night battle had spread through the animal kingdom with the efficiency of smoke signals, carried on the wind by scavengers who had feasted on the aftermath. Atlas adapted to his growing reputation with the wisdom that comes from surviving the impossible. He hunted with greater caution now, understanding that his legend had made him a target for every ambitious predator seeking to claim his throne. Young males arrived from distant ranges, drawn by stories of the giant who had faced down 200 buffalo and lived a roar about it. Each challenger brought their own interpretation of courage, their own theory about how to topple a living myth. The mountain lion met each test with the same methodical precision that had carried him through his greatest trial. Some challengers he defeated through strength, others through cunning, and a few through the simple application of experience earned in battles they could never imagine. His territory expanded with each victory, stretching across ridgelines and valleys until it encompassed an area larger than some small countries. Human visitors to the Atlas Mountains began reporting encounters with a lion unlike any in the textbooks. Photographers captured images of a creature that seemed to belong to an earlier age, when predators ruled through divine right rather than mere biological advantage. His midnight mane flowing in the mountain wind became the symbol of untamed wilderness, a reminder that some corners of the world remained beyond human dominion. Scientists organized expeditions to study this living relic, but Atlas proved as elusive as he was formidable. Cameron glimpses of his passage traps capture but never the full measure of his presence. Tracking devices placed on prey animals revealed the boundaries of his territory, but could not explain the intelligence behind his hunting patterns. He had become something more than a lion, elevated by legend into a force of nature that operated according to laws written in stone and starlight. The years following the great battle transformed Atlas from predator into something approaching mythology. Rangers stationed at remote outposts spoke of sightings that defied explanation. A massive shadow moving across moonlit ridges where no lion should venture. Roars that carried impossible distances through the thin mountain air. Tracks pressed into snow at elevations where large cats had never been recorded. Each report added another layer to a legend that grew with every telling. Atlas had learned the most valuable lesson any apex predator can master. True power lies not in constant displays of dominance, but in the careful management of reputation. His victory against the buffalo herd had created something more valuable than territory. It had established his name as a force that demanded respect across every corner of the high Atlas. Prey animals altered their migration routes to avoid his domain. Rival predators sought easier hunting grounds rather than risk confrontation with the Mountain King. The ecological impact of his presence rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Vegetation patterns shifted as herbivores changed their grazing habits. Water sources that had been heavily trafficked grew quiet as animals learned to associate them with danger. The balance of life across hundreds of square miles had tilted toward the preferences single individual of a whose reputation preceded him like morning shadow. But legends come with their own burdens. Atlas found himself increasingly isolated as his fame spread beyond the boundaries of the natural world. Research teams arrived, with equipment designed to study him from safe distances. Documentary crews established base camps at strategic locations, hoping to capture footage that would cement their careers. The mountain that had once been his private kingdom now buzzed with human activity, driven by fascination with the impossible. The attention brought unexpected challenges. Younger lions, emboldened by stories that painted Atlas as aging and vulnerable, made pilgrimages to his territory, seeking to claim the throne through combat. These challengers arrived with their own legends, their own victories against formidable opponents. Each believed they possessed the secret to defeating the Mountain King. Each discovered that reputation built on impossible deeds carries weight that cannot be measured in pounds or muscle. One such challenger emerged from the forests of the Middle Atlas in the winter of 2023. A massive male whose scars told stories of battles fought across Morocco's wildest regions. He had earned his reputation by hunting alone in territories where prides had failed, by surviving encounters with armed poachers, by claiming dominance over landscapes that had broken weaker predators. His arrival was announced by roars that echoed through valleys like artillery fire. The confrontation came at dawn on a ridge overlooking the Aurica Valley. Two titans faced each other across 50 yards of rocky ground, while the mountains themselves seemed to hold their breath. The challenger possessed youth and hunger, advantages that had carried him through every previous Atlas battle, countered with experience earned through trials that existed beyond the imagination of his opponent. The battle lasted 3 hours and reshaped the very landscape where it occurred. Boulders split under the impact of bodies thrown with impossible force. Trees splintered as combatants crashed through ancient groves. The sound of their conflict carried for miles, drawing scavengers who circled at safe distances, waiting for the inevitable feast that would follow. When silence finally returned to the ridge, only one lion remained standing. Atlas bore new wounds that would heal into fresh scars, permanent reminders of a challenge that had pushed him closer to his limits than any since the buffalo herd. The pretender lay broken among the rocks, his dreams of glory extinguished in the span of a mountain morning. The victory came at a cost that went beyond physical damage. Atlas felt the weight of years settling into his bones like winter frost. His reflexes, though still deadly, had lost the lightning precision of youth. His massive frame, while still imposing, now carried the accumulated damage of countless battles. The Mountain King was mortal after all, subject to the same laws of time that governed every creature beneath the sun. Yet mortality brought its own form of power. Atlas began to hunt with a precision that bordered on artistry, each kill executed with economy that would not waste movement, no energy. He selected his battles with the wisdom that comes from understanding the true cost of conflict. The desperate charges of his youth gave way to calculated strikes that achieved maximum effect through minimum risk. Thus ended the Chronicle of Atlas, the unbroken giant whose roar still echoes through the Atlas Mountains like thunder trapped in stone. From a cub born in shadow to the king who faced 200 buffalo and lived to tell the tale, his story reminds us that legends are not born from strength alone, but from the courage to stand when all hope seems lost. The mountains remember his name, whispered in the wind that carries across peaks where mortals fear to tread. If this tale of impossible courage moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories of the wild, and remember that somewhere in Morocco's highest peaks, the spirit of the Mountain King endures forever.